Hello, I can see we have people joining, so I'm just going to wait for a few minutes and give everyone a couple of minutes to log in. But from my end, I'm delighted that we have people joining because at least that means my Zoom link is working. So I'm going to just wait for 10:02 if that's okay. And let people come in. Just for those who are joining, my name is Niamh McGuigan. I work as Science and Engineering Promotions Officer in Maynooth University, and you would have received some emails from me. So thanks a million. We've had huge interest in Niamh's talk today. And just for your information, and I sent it an email, we are recording this. I will share once we have it downloaded and that, I'll send it on to you, and you're welcome to share it with colleagues and other classes and other teachers in your own school or other schools indeed. I suppose what's great about these kind of talks is usually at an open day I can stand up and talk about the courses at Maynooth University. But what's really exciting for me is actually having Niamh here. So I'm working in Maynooth University for just over 3 years, and one of the first people that I was very fortunate to have a coffee with was Niamh. I'm not sure if you remember this, Niamh. And I just, it was great to meet other people from around the universities, but especially Niamh's story. It was one of the standout stories 3.5 years later about her journey to maths and stats. And I had asked myself and Niamh just logged on here 10 minutes before we started. And I said, Niamh, do I remember this correctly? Didn't you tell me that you actually hated maths coming into Maynooth General Science because everyone has to study maths in General Science in first year? And I was like, didn't you tell me that your intention was to drop maths after first year? And she was like, yeah, that was me. So I was like, oh, great. I'm sure there's going to be lots of interest. So Niamh, I'm going to hand over to you in a few minutes, but I just want to big shout out to Coláiste de Lacy in Ashbourne, County Meath. Brilliant to have Ashbourne here. In fact, you may recognise that, well, you may know I'm not from Meath, but I'm living here for the last 15 years, and I brought 4 kids up to Croke Park to see the Meath ladies winning the All-Ireland in a thrilling final. Apologies to the Dublin schools, I'm coming to you next, but it was a great day out for us, so congrats to all in Meath, and I know you have some local heroes in Ashbourne. We're also joined by St Mary's in Dundalk, County Louth, near enough to my own home county in Monaghan. We have Art School LaSalle that I mentioned, the All-Ireland final there. We've students from Cork College of Commerce, Rathdown School. We have students from Wild Park College in Clondalkin and Carlow Institute of Further Education. It's great to have the FE sector here too. Moat Community School in Westmeath, Clifton and Galway, Coláiste de Lacy, Eureka, big shout out to Eureka in Kells, Blessington Community College in Wicklow. We have schools in Presentation College, Galway, Tipperary. Oh, Niamh, we have a few schools from your home county in Wexford, St Mary's and Gorey. And we have schools, Loreto Secondary School, Pembroke Hill. Hi to everyone there. Santa Spina College, St Mary's Secondary School, Nina, and Our Lady's College in Drogheda, to name but a few. So I'm going to just hand over in a second, Niamh, but just to say to you, schools and teachers, students, make sure and ask any questions in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring those. I see St Mary's are using that. Hi, Noelle, in the Q&A box there. Niamh has kindly agreed that if she says something and you have a question about it, if you pop it in the chat box, I can interrupt Niamh and ask her on the spot. So please engage with us. This is really for your benefit, and we hope you really get a lot out of this. So Niamh, I'm going to be in the background. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to you, and any technical difficulties or whatever. Oh, I don't know what I'll do actually, Niamh, but we wing it. Okay, so enjoy everyone, and we will be in touch after this, and I may be answering questions throughout this and interrupting you, Niamh. So I'm going to mute myself and turn off mute.
Thank you very much, Ita. I'm just going to share my screen now, first of all. Ita, could you maybe just let me know if you can see that okay?
Yep, that's good going. Yep, all looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this talk today, or for tuning in virtually at least. So my talk is called The Many Hats We Wear in Stats, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the things I get to work on as a statistician. But before that, I want to tell you a little bit about the kind of roller coaster journey I've had from maths in secondary school to being a statistics lecturer in Maynooth. So I have this how it started, how it's going slide, and I have a quote here, which is, why would anybody want to do this being statistics for a living? And this is something that I said in 2007 when I was sat in a statistics lecture in my second year of college. And one of my friends constantly reminds me of this. So she was sat beside me and she's always reminding me that I once upon a time said this, because now I'm obviously a lecturer in the stats department. So there was a time where I did not see myself as a statistician and I didn't really understand why anybody would want to do it. But then there's this how it's going, where a few years ago, I posted this on my Instagram, which is the picture of my name on the door in Logic House, which is the building where I am based in Maynooth. And the caption is, I never imagined when I was a student in Maynooth that I'd end up back there one day with my name on the door. So grateful for how things have worked out. And this is really true. I did not think that I would ever, one, be a lecturer, or two, be a statistics lecturer. So if somebody had said to me in 2007 that one day I'd be back in Maynooth, I would have laughed. I would have thought, no way could I possibly end up back here working in the maths and stats department. But I did. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how that happened. So what I have here is the roller coaster. And what you can see here is I have going from I love maths or stats to I hate maths and stats over time through different periods of my life. So I started, I'll talk about secondary school and my undergraduate degree into my master's, my PhD, which is a funny kind of all over the place type of relationship I had, into a postdoc, and then what I'm doing now. And so when I started in secondary school, so I won't go back further than secondary school, but when I started in secondary school, I loved maths. It was one of my favorite subjects. I felt like I was good at it. I did very well. It was by far the subject that I thought I was best at. And in my junior cert, I got an A, and it was my subject is the one I liked the most. But when I got into 5th and 6th year, I found maths, something changed, and I lost all confidence with studying maths. It became very abstract for me. I couldn't really connect with it. I didn't see how it could be applied in the same ways I used to be able to see it. I couldn't work things out in the same way as I could before, and it just got harder. And I really lost my confidence with it. In 5th and 6th year, and so much so that I was just not sure I even wanted to do it. I was taking higher level maths, but contemplated dropping down to ordinary level maths. I failed my maths mock in 6th year. I did persevere, but I didn't enjoy it anymore. I kept it on, and I kept it on because eventually I kind of knew I wanted to go and do a general science degree in Maynooth. I knew I needed maths as well, so I kind of tried, but I didn't do very well in it, and I didn't have the same joy for it that I had when I was in kind of 1st to 3rd year. So that's where I was in 5th and 6th year, not happy about doing maths. And then I went to do a general science degree in Maynooth. And the reason I actually did the general science degree is because I liked chemistry. So I was doing chemistry as a subject in secondary school. And I thought I liked that subject, and I was going to try and keep it on. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I thought I might be a teacher, secondary school teacher. So I thought general science was a good way to go. And as part of that degree, you have to do mathematics in 1st year. So I became a little bit indifferent to maths, and I assumed I would drop it after 1st year, to be quite honest. I didn't think I would keep it on. You have to do 4 subjects as part of the general science degree in Maynooth. So I had maths, biology, chemistry, and maths physics. And it was okay. I felt like I was able to keep on top of the work of maths as I was going through first year, but again, I didn't love it, and I thought, yeah, I probably will try and get rid of this or drop it if I can. So as it turns out, I didn't drop it into second year because I dropped maths physics instead. So I kept maths then in second year and went on to do maths, chemistry and biology. And then you'll see me, or you'll see my little emoji here with my eye roll. This is my in second year, where I was like, why would anybody do this for a living? So as part of maths in second year, we have to do statistics. And I just didn't see why, I don't know, statistics didn't click with me at that time. And I thought it was a little bit boring. But then as I decided to keep going, I kept chemistry. I wanted to keep chemistry throughout my degree, but I also had the option to do a double honors degree. So I decided to keep the stats and the chemistry going into third and fourth year, because as I got into third year, I started to think, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. And I could start to see how the statistics was the maths that could be applied to things, which is where I really found the interest in it. I could see how you could use the kind of maths side of stats to be able to apply things to real world applications. And the lecturers that I had in Maynooth in third and fourth year really helped me to see that, and they made it feel like it was a bit more interesting. And so I started to think, maybe this is something I could do, but I still liked the idea of doing chemistry. And so as I went into fourth year, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I applied for the HDIP to do secondary teaching, thought I might be a science teacher. And then I also just kind of by chance applied for the statistics masters in UCD. And I didn't think I wasn't sure if I would get the master's, but I did. I came out of my degree with a 2-1. So I wasn't a first class honors student by any means. But I did go in and decide to take the master's in statistics. I just wanted to give myself an opportunity to keep learning and explore the subject a little bit more. And so then we were here. During the master's, I really did start to really like the subject. So I got to focus just more on the statistics side of things, rather than being split between chemistry and statistics, which I think was helpful. I started to really enjoy it. There were some subjects I really liked, some subjects I still struggled with. There was a mathematical statistics subject that I found difficult because, again, it was more abstract and my brain works in a more applied way. So there were some subjects that were much more applied, and I found those interesting. And then one of those subjects I did very well in, and the lecturer of that subject asked me if I would be interested in doing a PhD. Now, when I say I am a person that did not have a clue what it meant to do a PhD, like, I'm telling the truth. I really did not know what a PhD involved. I didn't really know anything about academia. I had one friend who was doing a PhD, but other than that, I didn't really know anybody who had done that kind of thing. But it was 2011, and when I finished my master's, there wasn't that many jobs at the time, and I thought I'd give the PhD a go. It was the topic was on looking at sea level change in relation to climate change. I thought that might be something interesting to work on. But I always felt like an imposter as a PhD student. So here you'll see my love of maths and hate of maths and stats goes up and down and up and down and all over the place during my PhD. Sometimes I thought it was great and I thought, okay, yeah, I can definitely do this. And then there was other times where I thought, oh my God, I do not belong here. Why am I here? Everybody here is smarter than I am. I should not be doing this PhD. And so this was kind of a process over the 4 years. Like, overall, I really enjoyed my PhD and I got to do lots of traveling and I did learn a lot, but there was definitely times where I felt like I didn't belong and that I was not smart enough to be doing something like that. And so I kept at it, got my PhD, and then after that I moved to America. And you can see my smiley face here. I moved to the US to do a postdoc, which is something that you do after a PhD. It's more like a real job. You get paid more like a real job when you do that. And I really loved that. So I had a bit more confidence then. I still felt a little bit out of place, didn't really feel like I knew the system that well, but I really enjoyed what I was working on. I moved to a new type of project that was in relation to family planning and contraceptive use during this time, which I'll talk about today. And yeah, I started to kind of get a bit of confidence. I really loved the work I was doing. And so I was pretty happy with my what I was doing with stats over this time. And then, of course, there's a few ups and downs. And then ultimately, I came back to Ireland. I worked in UCD for a little while. And then I ended up as a lecturer in Maynooth. And I'm pretty happy now. But again, this could go on and on in terms of ups and downs of how I feel about statistics sometimes. I'm always learning. You never really stop learning. There's always things that there's so much to learn that there's always things that you can pick up and feel like you don't know anything about. And so, but that's part of the process, and I've learned to enjoy it as opposed to having it make me feel like I'm out of place all the time. So that's where I ended up in Maynooth. So what do I get to work on now? So after all of that, I ended up in a place where I get to work on all of these interesting, or what I think anyway, and I hope you will think are interesting topics. And so here I have some of my stats hats. So my talk is obviously called The Many Hats We Wear in Stats. So the different hats that I wear in terms of things that I work on. I work on looking at past sea levels. So this was something that I started during my PhD, looking at how sea levels changed over the last 2,000 years or so. So we're trying to go really far back in time to see how things have been changing in terms of sea level. And why do we do this? Well, it can help us to better understand what might happen with sea level rise in the future, because if you know what happened in the past, it can help you figure out what might happen in the future. And this is all very important in relation to climate change, and because sea level rise is going to be affected by climate change. So it's something that we have to think about. Another topic that I work on, so another stats hat, is to look at contraceptive use. Particularly, I focus on the world's poorest countries, and so the percentage of women that use or have access to contraception in the world's poorest countries. And this is what I did, and this is what I started working on when I moved to the USA. And this this is important because it can help us to determine where more work might be needed in particular countries to ensure that women have access to contraception. And access to contraception is really important for securing the well-being and autonomy of women. Women should be able to choose freely and for themselves if and when they want to have children, and that is not always the case across the world. And then a future stats hat, and something that I'm going to be working on over the next few years, is looking at extreme sea levels in Ireland. So I just had a project funded to look at this work, and this will hopefully help us better prepare for what might be to come in terms of, say, flood events in Ireland in relation to climate change, and how frequently floods might occur in the future if we consider different aspects of climate change. So there are the research ideas that I get to work on. I'm going to talk to you in a bit more detail about these two. But before I do that, I want to just tell you a little bit about other things I get to do. So a big part of my job is teaching. I'm a lecturer, so I get to teach students about statistics and why it's so important. Keep my fingers crossed that I don't have a student sitting in my class going, why would anybody do this for a living? Just like I did a few years ago. And I also, as part of that, show students how to work with computer code so that they can analyze data in different ways and get like some hands-on experience working with data. And I really like to do this because, well, the way my brain works is that I can understand something much better if I can see how it works, and if I can start to see the outcomes and how things can be applied, then it helps me to understand the more theoretical stuff. So that's why I really like to teach my students, helping them with code and using examples to help them learn. Something else I get to do is I get to go to very cool places to work and help people that aren't statisticians do things with statistics. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the talk. And I get to go to conferences and talk about my research and hear all the cool things that other people get to do. So I'm just going to give you, a window into what you can do with statistics, but there's so many applications that people work on in statistics. And when we go to conferences, we can kind of see what what everybody else is working on as well. And then something else I do as part of my job is I write papers. So if I have a research project that I'm working on and I have some cool statistical technique that I want to share, I have to write that up in a paper and hopefully get it published, and it gets reviewed, and there's a lot of hard work involved, and then you get your work out there and then other people can use it. So that's really what the aim is to work on something such that you get it to a place where then you can share it with everybody, and then they can use it to do things with their own work. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the different research projects that I work on. So the first one I will talk a little bit about is how do we look at past sea levels. So I mentioned that we look at past sea levels going back, say, about 2,000 years. And so how do we go back 2,000 years? We don't have data from 2,000 years ago, so we have to figure out a way to look back in time. Unfortunately, we're not like the Avengers. We cannot time travel and go back 2,000 years to see what sea level was back then. But what we can do, we do have a certain set of skills that allows us to look back in a different way. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that works. So believe it or not, for reconstructing sea level from 2,000 years ago, the answer lies in mud. And you're probably looking at these pictures and thinking, how could what she's showing me here help me to look at what sea level was 2,000 years ago? But what we do is, or I did this once upon a time, okay? So this is me out on a field trip in New Jersey a few years ago during my PhD. So I don't often get the opportunities to do this kind of work because usually I'm just sat on my computer. But I did get to go and see how the data that I need to use is actually collected, which was really, really interesting. And so here we're on a salt marsh. Okay, and what we're doing is coring. So we're digging these cores into the ground, we're pushing them down into the ground, and we're pulling them up to get these sediments, these sediment cores. And we actually can use these to help us reconstruct sea level. And the trick is that the further you go down into the ground, the further back in time you're going. And there are little microscopic species that live in this sediment, in this mud, that can actually tell us what sea level was, even as far back as 2,000 years ago. And so people that I work with, geologists, and people that I get to work with quite regularly and that I worked with during my PhD, they go out, sometimes in the summers, they go out on field work, and they might do 2 weeks of field work and collect these cores. And they also survey these marshes to be able to collect some data so that I can take all of the things that they've collected and all of the hard work that they've done. I take that and I try to turn it into a sea level record. So how does that work? So I'm going to talk you through this slide. There's quite a lot of things on this slide, but I'm going to try and explain to you how we can use the information that we get from that salt marsh to be able to reconstruct sea level. So it may not look like it in that picture, but this salt marsh here actually forms along a gradient, okay? So it builds up sediment year on year, and it ends up forming along an elevation. So if you want to think about what it actually might look like, it might look something like this, where you have, this is like my picture of the salt marsh. Obviously, the salt marsh is not blue, orange, and green, but this is just to represent colors that I'm going to talk about later. But think about that marsh, that grassland, as forming where you have high marsh, kind of middle marsh, and low marsh. And this gradient is related to elevation, okay? It forms along a slope or an elevation that we can relate to sea level, because you can say you're a certain height above sea level. So you can relate these elevations along this marsh to what sea level is at that time. And you can do that. So we could go out, like people can go out, next week, and they can collect all of these elevations. You can measure the elevation. So you have a measurement related to sea level, and you can do that in the modern day. We say we can do that in the modern environment. What we can also do is look at these little microscopic species. These are called foramnifera. There's lots of different species of these. This is just an example of one of them, and you have to find them under a microscope. So you can take samples along that marsh. So if you go back, if we go back here, you can do this before you core into the ground. You can take samples all along this kind of grassland from lower marsh up to the higher marsh where the trees are. So the trees are going to be the higher marsh and down here will be the lower marsh. You can take samples, and you can take samples from the mud here, and you can count these little microscopic species. And so what happens is these actually have a relationship with elevation and sea level, because some of these species like to be completely covered in water, and some of them like to be exposed to air some of the time. So some of them will always be down in the low marsh because they'll be much, much closer to water. And some of them will always be found up in the high marsh because they like to be out of water some of the time. And so we count them. And what I'm showing you here, if you've ever done anything as part of statistics in your maths classes, you might have talked about histograms or bar plots. And this is a way that we visualize data that we might count, or when we're looking at the frequency of a particular type of data. So I'm looking at the frequency of these different species, right? So I'm going to have species A, species B, and species C. And these bars are going to tell me about how many of those species I have. And here, what I'm showing you on this axis here is elevation. So I'm going from high to low in this axis. Oftentimes we go from low to high, but in this case, I'm going from high to low. So I'm at higher elevations here. Remember, we can relate elevation to sea level, and lower elevations down here. And what I have here are the counts. Okay, so these bars will go up to counts or frequencies of these different species. And so think about what this plot might be showing you, right? We have different colors representing the different species at different parts of the marsh. So here I'm at high marsh. So this species A is a high marsh species. It has high frequency or high counts, or we see a lot of these at the higher marsh. And then the counts start to get a little bit lower as you get into the orange part or the middle of the marsh. And then you move in and you start to see lots of species B. Okay, so you start off a little bit lower and then it gets higher and higher again. And so you have a higher frequency or higher counts or a higher abundance of species B in this middle part. And then as you get into the lower marsh, species B starts to disappear and you start to see a lot of species C. And so here we see species C, and then it starts to kind of taper off as you get down into the very low part of the marsh. And so what is this telling us? Well, if I see a lot of species A, then I know I'm in the high marsh. If I see a lot of species B, then I know I'm in the middle marsh. And if I see a lot of species C, then I know I'm in the low marsh. And what I can do is I know that from the modern environment, I dig down into the ground, get my core, get my sediment core. Okay, this is the lower part, this is the higher part. So this part is going to be older than this part, because the further you go down into the ground, the older you're getting. What we can do is we can divide this little mud core or sediment core into samples. You might divide it into 1 centimeter samples. You take a bit of the sample, let's say at the bottom, you put some parts of it under a microscope and you count those little species of forams. You count those little microscopic species. And if in this part of the core, so if down here in the core, you can see a lot of species A, then you know you're at high marsh, high elevations for this core sample. Then you go take a sample here in the middle. If in the middle of the core, you see a lot of species B, then you know you're at the middle elevations. And if at the higher parts of the core, you see a lot of species C, then you're at lower elevations. So you can actually reconstruct elevation, because you can measure elevation in the modern environment across the marsh here, but you can't measure what elevation used to be in this core as you dig back into the ground. You have to figure out a way to try and reconstruct it. And those little species help us to do that.
Sorry, Niamh, can I ask how you count them, and do you work with, is is it under the microscope and the statistician works with the geologist, or is there other scientists involved?
Yeah, so the geologists that I work with would spend time in their lab counting these. So they have a period of time where they take all of these little sediments, they put them under the microscope, and they spend hours and hours and days counting, looking for these little species of forams. They're trained to know what these look like and to be able to identify them.
Brilliant. So it's very much like what you're opening my eyes up to. It's very much teamwork and
absolutely. I couldn't do it without them. Like they do all the hard work. Like they do all the hard work of collecting all of this data. I got an opportunity to go and see how it works, but for the most part, the people I work with are the people that are collecting all of this information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Niamh.
And so what we end up with is a data set, okay? And it will be, and we try to represent data sets visually. So it might look something like this, where you plot it and you see the counts of the different species, and you can look at them in the core, and you can start to use what we call statistical models to figure out if I see a certain number of species A in the core, well, then that tells me what sea level was at that part of the core. So the relationship between the species counts and elevation can help us figure out sea level. That's the take-home message there. But how interesting is it that you can take this and you can get some really, really cool information about sea level from it? Like, who would have thought? I would never have thought that that would have been possible before I started to work on this stuff during my PhD. And so we start with mud and we end with stats. And so we take this, we have all of this data, we put it all together, it's put all together, and then it's sent to me. Usually I get these spreadsheets of data that are not half as interesting as being able to go out and actually, like, you know, dig into the ground. But I get all of these numbers with all of these counts, and I have to figure out the statistical models that are going to be useful to turn it into a sea level record. So we start here, count these little species of foraminifera. They'll all look a little bit different. That's done under the microscope. Something else we have to do is date the samples, because when you take a sample and you might figure out what sea level was, but you don't know what year it belonged to. So there's a whole other area of statistics involved with dating, where you take some plant life that's been preserved in the sample, and you can actually do something called radiocarbon dating, where you look at the degree of carbon decay, which can help you figure out how old the sample of mud is. And so we date the samples, and then I get all of this information. Here's me working away on my laptop, trying to develop these statistical models to eventually produce something that looks like this. So this is a sea level record. This is a sea level record for New York. It's a record that we have over about a 1500-year period. And again, think about what this is showing you here. So what I have here on the x-axis is time. So I'm going back in time from about 500 up to about the year 2000. On the y-axis here, I have my measure of relative sea level. And the thing that you want to recognize in this figure or in this graph is that these points, they're increasing over time. Okay, so I start down here and I increase all the way up to the year 2000. So sea levels have been increasing over the last 1500 years. But what else is happening in this graph? You see these points that are moving, they're related to a rate of change, and that's what's happening up here. So each year I'm estimating a rate of change. Now, what's important to recognize, look, when you get up here to the year 2000, you get up to about a rate of 3 millimeters per year in terms of sea level rise. When you're down here at the beginning, so it'll come back down to the beginning now, you're at about 0.4 millimeters per year. So why is it important to reconstruct sea level? Because if I told you in the year 2000, or if I told you in the year 2020, the rate of sea level rise is about 3 millimeters per year in New York. And then people are going to think, okay, that's fine. But what does that actually mean? Well, if you compare that to what it used to be 1500 years ago, then the rate of sea level rise has gone from about 0.4 all the way up to 3 over that space of time, 0.4 millimeters per year, all the way up to 3 millimeters per year. So the rate is increasing, and this is really important. It's really important to know what happened in the past to be able to put what we're currently seeing into context. And it's really important to be able to figure out how this might then go on and change in the future. So having this information allows us then to get projections out into the future as well, to see where sea level rise might be in, say, 2050 or 2100. And you can look at the changes under different climate change scenarios. Okay, so that's the sea level stuff. So just to sum up, why is this important? It allows us to understand the past and put the present into context. So by using statistics on this data that we collect from this, basically from mud, we can understand, it can help us understand the past in terms of what happened in sea level and put what's happening currently into more context. It helps us get better projections of future sea level rise. So the more informed you are about what's happened before, the better informed you can be about what's going to happen in the future. And then we can improve our ability to plan for the future. So by having these different scenarios about what might happen, we can actually try and plan in a better way for different scenarios. And I just want to mention here, my PhD student, Niamh, she's involved in a project called Línta na Farraige, which means lines of the sea. And they are going to try and install visuals with lights all around Ireland that will help people see where sea levels might be in, say, like 50 or 100 years' time. And so here's an example of that, where the light is going up like about halfway up this house here, in terms of where sea level rise might be in this location in the future. And so that will help people really visualize the impact of sea level rise and how it might impact people's lives in the future. So this is all the work that we do as statisticians helps to give people the numbers where we can show people what the future might hold and what we can do to try and help and prevent these things from happening. Okay, I'm just going to pause there, Ita, just to make sure there's no questions before I go on to the next part.
No, all good. All
okay,
good.
Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a completely different topic, right? So when I went and did my postdoc, I did something completely unrelated to sea level change. But this is one of the advantages of being a statistician is that you can take what you've learned in one application and you can use it in a completely different application. So the skills I learned during my PhD for, analyzing the type of data that I did really helped me when I went on to do another project, but it was a completely different project. And I got to work on something that was really interesting, but in just a very different way. So the next topic I worked on was contraceptive use. And specifically, I was looking at contraceptive use in the world's poorest countries. And I wanted to figure out, or I needed to figure out, what contraceptive use was in the world's poorest countries. Now, we cannot just guess the answer to this. Obviously, as statisticians, we need tools to be able to help us get good estimates of the things that we're interested in. And oftentimes, those estimates come with uncertainty that we have to make sure that we tell people about as well. So how do we do this? So if you've, again, done any statistics in your maths classes, you might have talked about surveys. You may or may not have heard about how we do surveys as statisticians, or you might just know about surveys in general. And so with a survey, what you want to do is try and figure out what you know about a thing that you're interested in. So if I'm interested in contraceptive use, and I want to figure out the percentage of women that are using contraception in a particular country, I can rely on surveys to do that. And thankfully, there are huge surveys that are carried out every kind of 4 or 5 or maybe 6 years in all the countries across the world that ask questions about contraceptive use. So there is information out there based on these surveys that can help us figure out what we know already. And then we might have to fill in gaps. And then what I ultimately want to do is project out into the future. So we start by trying to figure out what we already know. What does a survey do? It takes a population of people. So I'm interested, let's say, in the population of women in a particular country. Now, I cannot go out and ask every woman in the country whether or not they use contraception. If I could, then I would know exactly what the percentage of women is that use contraception, right? But we can't do that. So what a survey does is it takes a sample of that population of interest. And so here I have, just as an illustration, a sample of 8 women from this population of women. And then from that sample, I can ask, it's much easier to ask these 8 women the question than it is to ask all of these women the question. So I want to ask them, or the people who are carrying out these surveys want to ask them about contraceptive use. So these are carried out nationally by governments as well, these surveys, okay? And so the questions that are asked, there's a particular survey that's carried out every kind of 4 or 5 years called the Demographic and Health Survey. And they specifically ask questions about contraceptive use, such as which method of contraception are you using? How long have you been using the method? Are you and your partner using any method to delay or avoid getting pregnant? So these are the kind of questions that people ask. And so what we can figure out from that is we assume that this sample is a good representation of the population. Okay, we need to take a random sample such that we don't say, what we don't want in our sample is just a sample full of only 20-year-olds or a sample full of only 40-year-olds, because it wouldn't be representative of the entire population. So that's the thing about surveys. You want them to represent the population that you're interested in. So we get what we hope is a random sample, which is representative of the population. We ask these, let's say we ask these 8 women the question, we find that 4 of them are using contraception. And so in that case, then we can say that 50% of, we assume that 50% of women in this population are using contraception. And we'll have some uncertainty around that because we've dealt with a sample instead of the entire population. So that's done on a much larger scale than what I'm showing you here, but that's the general idea. Okay, so we can get the information that we want from these surveys. So then what we want to do is use statistical models. So again, I'm coming back now to this idea of figuring out ways to use this information that I have from these surveys. And oftentimes what we want to do is fill in the gaps about what we know. So let's take an example here where I start off with this data. These surveys have been carried out. What I have here might be a percentage of contraceptive use. So the percentage of women using contraception in some country that I'm going to focus on. And also I'm looking at how this changes over time. So I have these data points at different time points. So I might have one earlier, and then a few years later, I get another survey, which gives me a data point, which is the percentage of women using contraception. And then another few years later, I get another data point, which again is another percentage of women using contraception. And based on these data points, you can see things have been increasing. Got an increase here, and then an increase here. But I don't really know what happened in between these 2 time points. And I don't really know what happened in between these 2 time points because I don't have the data to tell me that. So I use statistics to help fill in the gaps of what most likely happened in between these data points. And then also I can use statistics to project out into the future. So when we fill in the gaps, we often call that model-based estimates. So we use statistical models and we get estimates of what happened in between the data points. And then we get projections. So I have my last data point here, and then I'm projecting out into the future beyond that last data point. So what this looks like in practice might be something like this. So now I have a real example. Okay, so what I have here, now let's again think about what's in this graph. Okay, so if you have ever done anything in terms of visualization in statistics, and I'm sure if you've taken statistics as part of your maths courses, you are looking at plots and how to plot things in different ways. You might have looked at scatter plots, for example. So here, I'm showing you a graph. Let's think about what's on this graph. I have different colors that must be representative of something, because you shouldn't really color points on a graph unless the colors mean something, because otherwise it can just be a bit confusing. So these colors are going to mean something. These shaded areas are going to mean something. I need to think about what's on my x-axis. I need to think about what's on my y-axis to help me figure out what's happening in this graph. So I have a title here. It says it's contraceptive use, and the country that it's looking at is Afghanistan. I know I have a percentage here on the y-axis. So this is going to be my percentage of contraceptive use in Afghanistan. Here I have year on the x-axis. So I'm looking at the different, how contraceptive use is changing over time. These points are my data points. Okay, so I have a data point here. I don't have anything from about, this is probably in 1970, and then I don't have anything again until about the year 2000. The different colors are different surveys that were carried out, and the legend tells you about that. So here I have the survey type. There's DHS, which stands for Demographic and Health Survey, MICS, which stands for Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, and then the national survey. So these are just different surveys that are carried out in these countries. So the different colors represent the different survey types. And then I have my estimates. This line represents the estimates that I get from my statistical model. Okay, so it's filling in the gaps between this point and these points here, where I don't really know what happened. It's going to try and get the best estimate through all these data points. So I have a lot of data points here, and some of them are saying different things, but at the same time. So my model, my statistics does something called smoothing. It smooths through this kind of noise that I might have in these data points, goes through that most recent data point, and then projects out into the future where I don't have any information and I want to kind of figure out what might happen in the future based on what I know happened in the past. The shaded area is the uncertainty. And what you should notice here in this graph is that the uncertainty gets a lot bigger the further out into the future that you go. So I'm much more uncertain about what's happening here in the year, this is up as far as 2030, than I am down here in, say, the year 2018, where I have a data point. But this is what statistics allows us to do. It allows us to fill in these gaps, give us our best estimate of what we think contraceptive use is, and then also give us the best estimate of what it might be in the future, but with some uncertainty around those guesses. Now, what does this allow us to do? So I might have a data point in 2018. Let's say this one is a 2018 data point, okay? And I also have this other data point that's also in that year. I don't really know what contraceptive use is in that year, but my statistical model gives me an estimate based on smoothing through these data points in that year. In 2020, I don't have any data points. So in 2020, I can go and I can look at where my line hits the y-axis and I can get the percentage, and it comes out at about 23%. So from my statistical model, I can say in the year 2020, contraceptive use is about 23% in Afghanistan, with an uncertainty of about 19 up to 28%. And I can do the exact same thing in 2030. I can go up where I hit my line, go across, see where I hit the y-axis, and that's about 33%. So about 33% of women are estimated to use contraception in Afghanistan in 2030, but the uncertainty is bigger than it had been for 2020. So it's 22% up to 45%. So I have a good estimate. This is my most likely kind of estimate of what it's going to be, but I have uncertainty around that. Now, there's different ways you can visualize this. So this is one option. If I want to look at a particular country, I can look at it in this way, and it gives me a lot of information. And think about all of the ways you can convey information. You can use color to convey information. You can use different shapes of points if you wanted to convey different information. And part of being a statistician or a data scientist is to think about the best way to visualize data. And so another way we can visualize this type of data, let's say I did this for lots of countries, which is what I actually did when I was working on this. So I tried to get this percentage of women using contraception for lots of countries. So there was 69 of the world's poorest countries is what we focused on. And so here I'm showing you a map, and think about what this map is illustrating. So the colors on the map are going to mean something. And what they mean is going to be told to you in the legend. So I have contraceptive use in 2020. So that's what I'm showing on the map. That's the variable I'm showing. And what you can see is the colors are different bands, right? So here I have the yellow is when contraceptive use is less than 20%. So you see a lot of countries in Africa are less than 20%. And then I move into different colors up to the blue, for example, where contraceptive use is between 60 and 80%. So some countries have a much higher level of contraceptive use. Now, what does this visualization allow us to do? It allows us to compare things across different countries. So then we can say, or we can actually see what countries are doing better relative to other countries. And then that allows us to then maybe look into those countries a little bit more. What is that country doing to increase contraceptive use compared to the other countries? Maybe they have better family planning programs. Maybe those same programs could be implemented elsewhere. And we can use what we know from all of these other countries to help countries that are not doing so well. Or if governments see this, they might think, okay, well, our country is not doing very well relative to the places that are surrounding us. And so we need to up our game and make sure that our family planning services are on par with other countries. So this information is useful from that perspective as well. And so this is just another way to visualize that. It's a snapshot, so it's just one time point, but it looks across all countries. Whereas the other example that I showed you, this was one country looking at lots of different time points. So it just depends on what you want to show and what you want to illustrate. So why is this important? This is important because when we get estimates of contraceptive use, we can think about why contraceptive use itself is important. It allows women and couples to delay or limit pregnancies. This is going to help people achieve their healthiest outcomes. So it will help countries achieve the healthiest outcomes for women and children. If women do not want to, or are not ready, or families are not in a financial place to be able to have children, then they should be able to prevent having children. And so overall, this will improve well-being, the well-being of families. And this actually relates directly to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals are goals from the United Nations. They have targets for 2030. One of the goals is good health and well-being. It's goal number 3. And a target of goal number 3, which I'll point you to, is 3.7, which is to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services. So that will include contraception. So if we want to ensure universal access to reproductive healthcare services, we need to know where we're at currently in all of these different countries across the world. And we need to know where we're projected to be in the future, let's say in 2030, when we want to achieve these targets for sustainable development. And once we know where we're going, then we might figure out if we need to make changes to get to where we want to be.
And Niamh, it's Ita here. Just to let you know, we're at 10:51. So
yeah, I'm almost done now.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to finish up now. That's talking a bit about the research that I work on. I just want to talk about the different places that I've had the opportunity to go as a statistician. So you might think that I'm kind of just sitting in my office on my computer all day, but that is not the case. As I already showed you, I got to do field work in New Jersey. I've got to go to a lot of other places across the USA. I got to visit the United Nations a few years ago to work with people from the United Nations Population Division, which was very interesting, going into the United Nations. So that was a really good experience. That was in relation to the family planning work. Been to other places all over the US, San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, Boston. Boston was again to work with geologists in relation to the sea level work. I got to go to Togo a few years ago in West Africa to help people run and use the statistical models that I work on for the family planning stuff, to teach people how to get the results themselves for their own countries. I got to go to Singapore a few years ago to work with people in relation to the sea level work that I do. Been to in terms of Europe, got to go to the Netherlands. I was invited to give a talk over there, and I've been to conferences in Austria as well. And I think there's probably other places that I've gotten to go. So yeah, as a statistician, you do get opportunities to travel, something I've missed over the last couple of years during the pandemic. So I hope I will get to travel again over the next few years.
Just on that, Niamh, Noelle has asked a question from St Mary's in New Ross, and it says, apart from academia, what other workplaces do we see statisticians? And immediately I'm thinking of elections and Facebook and, you know.
Oh yeah. I have some quotes at the end of different things that people do that might help answer that question.
Perfect, thanks, Niamh.
So this is my second to last slide. So I asked people on Twitter to give me their stats hats. So this talk was the many hats we wear in stats. I've talked about my stats hats and things that I get to work on, but I asked people to give me other things that they work on. And so these are things that people replied. One person said they help doctors better treat hospitalized children. So this person uses statistics in a hospital setting and uses data to help get better treatments for kids. So that's something that people could work on. This person is a structural integrity engineer who now works as a researcher, uses stats to describe ways in which data are imperfect. So oftentimes we have to work with data that have limitations, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. This person uses or is statistical software to analyze carbon emissions from dairy cows. So they're in the dairy industry. This person was also in one of my lectures. So they said they learned from me in my lectures, which is good. We have a PhD student here using stats to optimize the performance of offshore wind farms. So there we have renewable energy that someone is working in. Here we have a stats advisor at a university helping students and researchers think about their research in terms of data and mathematical and statistical models. This person uses stats to help get new treatments for serious diseases like cancer. So this person works in cancer research, again, in the healthcare system. And here we have, this is from Raphael, actually, who's a colleague of mine in Maynooth. He uses stats to estimate how many animals there are in their natural habitats to help try and conserve them. And yes, there's many other applications. There's lots of industry applications for statisticians in places that really want data scientist roles, like places like Google and Facebook, or firms like Accenture and all of those different places. There's definitely spots for statisticians. And I just want to finish up very, very quickly by just plugging our maths and stats courses at MU, at University. So we offer programs across the board in different areas of maths and statistics. So we have pure maths, applied maths, statistics, and you can come in through the general science and keep statistics as a double honours if you want to, which is what I did. And then we have a data science degree as well. And so I'm a lecturer for the first year data science course. And so if you do decide to come to Maynooth and take data science, you will definitely see me in your first year. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, Ita, and I can stop sharing or leave up the slides if people want to refer back to them. So I'll leave it up to you.
No, you can leave it up, Niamh, and just want to thank you very much for that. And it's just funny when Noelle asked the question there, I remember talking to actually a fella from Monaghan, all the Monaghan people stand out in my mind, Niamh, but he had studied maths and stats in Maynooth, and then he went on to work in Met Éireann in media.
Oh, yeah.
So I was asking him, to work as a weather forecaster, or how did he get a job in Met Éireann? He said that they employ mostly statisticians. Yeah, so that was one area that really, struck me. I'm just thinking of all the multinationals in Ireland, from Facebook to Google. I'm doing a course at the minute on optimization use on social media, and all they're talking to me about is, I was on a course from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock last night, and it was all data science, and it was analyzing your data. And so I would see that use in all walks of life in Ireland, from social media to optimizing our ad searches to the weather forecasting. Any course that I seem to be looking at the minute, stats is an integral part of it. No matter what, like even if you're going into a career in marketing, to understand and collect all the data of where your customers are coming. So you're so right, like it's so varied. Sorry, I see a question in, is there anywhere I could do a summer work experience before starting college next year if I'm thinking to go into maths next year? I would like you to ask your teacher to send me an email, and I'll see if what I can find out on that, because you've caught me on the hop and I don't know. So possibly just ask your teacher to send me an email and I'll follow up on that. Just like to thank you, Niamh. If anyone has any questions, I can unmute you if you want to raise your hand or ask a Q&A. I know it's 2 minutes to 11, and possibly everyone looking for a bit of a break. I just, on behalf of everyone attending, Niamh, and on behalf of the admissions team at Maynooth University, you've made me feel so welcome at Maynooth University from the first day, and now to deliver this presentation and sharing some of your insights on a personal level and a professional level. I'd just like to thank you, actually, just from the bottom of my heart. If you don't mind, I'm going to resend the recording to all those who have registered. If any technical questions or questions that I can't answer come into me, Niamh, I might touch base with you and maybe forward you on the teachers' emails or the students' emails that I can't answer.
Of course, yeah. If anybody has any questions, they can feel free to share my email. Like they can get in touch with me directly if that's easier as well. If anyone has any questions about the talk or about doing stats in Maynooth or anything like that, I'm happy to
Brilliant, thank you. And Elaine Higgins wants to thank you on behalf of Presentation College in Tuam in the message there. So I'm going to end the meeting. Please, teachers, don't hesitate to contact myself or Niamh, and many thanks for your attendance here today. And everyone have a lovely day. Thanks again, Niamh.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.